The story begins with bullies catching up with Haran in a dark alley. One of the hooligans grabs Haran by the chest. Haran is genuinely perplexed as to why there is no way they will leave him alone. Haran's bewilderment further infuriates the biggest of the gang. Ambala is angered that he has called out to Haran many times and Haran has not responded to him. He starts throwing punches in his face. Haran is barely on his feet, covering his face with his hands as the Ambal prepares to strike again. With an animal grin, the Amban brings his heavy fist over Haran's head and delivers another series of blows to Haran's head, who tries to cover it with his hands. Suddenly, the enraged Amban is stopped by Ben Hong, who has been watching from the sidelines all this time. He tries to calm his gang member down, telling him that he's already gone too far. When the Ambal retreats, he squats down next to Haran to assess his condition after the blows. But Haran doesn't really care about his abrasions and facial wounds. He's worried that he's too late. Meanwhile, Ben Hoon tells Haran that he's disappointed that he waved at him and he ran away. Suddenly, Ben Hoon's face suddenly changes. There is no longer an ounce of sympathy on him. A bestial grin appears. Ben Hoon also delivers a blow to the head, which makes Haran's eyes darken. But the hooligans are bored of mocking their victim and they move away, leaving Haran lying on the ground. Haran only has the strength to crawl to the brick wall of the house to lean against it. He tries to gather his thoughts as he hears the distant voices and sneers of the bullies. After raising his hand and glancing at his wristwatch, Haran realizes that he is very late. Realizing this, Haran jumps up sharply, forgetting the pain, and runs home, trying to get there in time. Stepping into the apartment and slamming the door behind him, Haran hurriedly takes off his sneakers. Throwing his backpack on the chair, Haran heads for the TV that stands against the far wall in the living room. With a hand trembling in pain, Haran reaches over to the coffee table where the goggles and virtual reality controller lie. With a sense of complete confidence, Haran puts the virtual reality goggles on his face. Then, just as confidently, Haran picks up the virtual reality controller. Fully equipped, completely oblivious to his pain from the bruises inflicted by the bullies, Haran is ready to immerse himself in the virtual world. And in a few seconds, Haran transforms into his virtual game character. Now he is no longer a frail schoolboy who can be beaten up by bullies in a dark alley. He is a young and brave swordsman. At the permanent meeting place, at the foot of a high mountain in ancient ruins, Haran is already waiting for his loyal allies. One of the allies, a big man with a necklace in the form of several huge beads, stared intently at the young swordsman. Waving his 3 arms, the big man began to berate the young swordsman for being away for so long. Suddenly, a red-haired beauty intervened in the conversation. She confessed that she was in the game for the first time and didn't know what to do. Full of confidence, the young swordsman slung his sword on his shoulder and urged the beauty not to worry about anything. His plan was to finish everything in an hour. All 4 of the young swordsman's faithful allies amicably supported this idea, and the whole company of daredevils appeared before the Elffest to receive a new task. Having received the task, the young swordsman and his 4 allies set off on a long journey. Determination is evident in the young swordsman's eyes. Mentally, he is setting himself up for victory. Suddenly, the hero's thoughts are interrupted by a red-haired beauty, for whom this is the very first trip. She points to a dark gorge, from which the company looks at the ominously burning eyes. But the big man reassures her, urging her to trust Haran. The travelers walk through the gorge. The path is narrow, and if they stumble, they could fall off the cliff. Suddenly, there is a rock fall, but it does not stop the brave men. Next, the travelers have to pass a narrow parapet, from which they come upon sharp thorns surrounded by poisonous liquid. After passing all the obstacles, the travelers reach their destination. A young swordsman stops the whole company. The young swordsman, Haran, as the leader of his team, is the first to step forward. When the team finds themselves in the cave, the red-haired beauty begins to rejoice that everything went safely. They did not meet a single gang on the way. However, a 3-armed big man with a necklace around his neck hastens to warn the newcomer that this is just the beginning. With a satisfied look on his face, anticipating the battle, He says that the most interesting part starts now. No sooner does he say this than an enemy army of demons suddenly appears. It is led by the bloodthirsty Trigon. The young swordsman is the first to engage the demon, who has already swung his axe at him. The eyes of the young swordsman, who in ordinary life is just a schoolboy named Haran, are burning. With all the power he possesses, Haran strikes the demon with his sword. The young swordsman is victorious in this battle. He is pleased with himself. In virtual reality, he is known and respected by everyone. Following the example of his leader, the rest of the team joins the fight. The deadly battle begins. All of Haran's allies have activated their magical abilities to defeat the demon army. Finally, the battle is over. The young swordsman and his allies are victorious, and the reward is treasure. The red-haired beauty is overjoyed, for this was her first assignment, which she managed thanks to Haran. Haran is honored by the words of gratitude and at the same time embarrassed. He tells his new friend that it is a credit to all the team members. Just then, the young swordsman is interrupted with a serious face by a large man with a necklace. He, his equally large but more silent companion, and the short and full Asian man think that the victory is Haran's due. Haran is very pleased to hear this and smiles, realizing that he is truly appreciated here. The young swordsman sincerely thanks his comrades for their praise and help in the battle. The task has been successfully completed. Haran's team is victorious. All of its members have their own things to do in real life, and therefore, everyone is going to leave. At the end, the big guy with the necklace asks Haran not to be late tomorrow because another task awaits them. After that, the big man, following the example of his comrades, also leaves the game. The young swordsman Haran bids farewell to his comrades with whom he has just won a fight. Everyone leaves the game, and the young swordsman is left alone with his thoughts. He exhales deeply, satisfied that everything ended safely and they had won. Not without a share of sadness, Haran thought it was time for him to return to real life as well. Haran was about to leave the game when suddenly some extraneous sounds caught his attention. The young swordsman looks up and sees a demon appearing in front of him. The young swordsman was surprised to see this monster. He had never seen such a demon in the game before. Besides, the mission was completed. Where did it come from? The young swordsman realizes that the appearance of a mysterious guest does not bode well. The demon makes intimidating noises, and the young swordsman realizes that it is preparing to attack. The demon comes so close that Haran can feel its stinking breath on him. The demon stares with its sinister gaze directly at Haran. Its eyes burn with a red light. The young swordsman decides to defeat the monster alone and brings his sword over it. Suddenly, Haran realizes that he cannot deliver a crushing blow. His hands are not obeying. The young swordsman tries his best to control his body, but it is as if it does not belong to him. Haran realizes that he can no longer control his character. After a few seconds, Haran realizes that his character, the young swordsman, is disappearing. After a few more seconds, the young swordsman simply vanishes into thin air. However, the young swordsman's story does not end there. Haran realizes that he finds himself in an unfamiliar place. Suddenly, Haran realizes that he begins to choke because he is in the water. He rushes to the surface. He succeeds and greedily gulps in air, trying to catch his breath. With his breathing back to normal, Haran opens his eyes. He is surprised by what he sees. He is in a river, and in front of him is a waterfall, behind which is a huge statue of an Asian deity. Looking at this statue, Haran tries to remember if this place was in the game. Next, he looks around, trying to find something familiar that will allow him to remember this location. Suddenly, out of the blue, Haran sees his reflection in the water. What he sees startles him. Haran realizes that he does not have his equipment, without which he is defenseless against the demons. Haran touches his shoulders, not believing that he is wearing his cloak, believing that his reflection in the water is some kind of illusion. But Haran becomes convinced that it is all real. He doesn't have his cloak, his sword, or any of his other belongings. Haran clutches his head in bewilderment at what is happening. He has absolutely no idea what to do next. Haran thinks it's some kind of system failure or hacking. Otherwise, how can he explain what is happening? Suddenly he remembers his allies. They will be waiting for him after all. He promised to be on time tomorrow. Haran grabs his head again, realizing that he screwed up with the demon and set his comrades up. The young swordsman's self-mobilization is interrupted by the sound of heavy footsteps behind him. Haran comes to his senses upon hearing the extraneous sound. He realizes that he needs to be on guard now. Turning around, Haran sees a masked stranger in front of him. The young swordsman doesn't realize who is in front of him, a human or a monster. Haran realizes that without his equipment and sword, he simply cannot defeat the stranger. The stranger's eyes, which burn with an ominous color, show that he did not come with good intentions. Haran realizes that the best solution for him is to flee. He will not prevail in this fight. But he does not have time to realize his plan, as the stranger strikes a blow that sends Haran flying backwards. The young swordsman is furious, but he has no strength to resist the stranger. The enemy is not going to retreat. He brings his heavy hammer over Haran's head again. The enemy then uses his laser whip to strike Haran one after another. Haran clutches his head, trying to pull off his virtual reality goggles in real life. Suddenly, he realizes that he's not succeeding. He is stuck in virtual reality. He tries to exit the game again, not realizing what's going on, why nothing is coming out. At this time, the masked opponent prepares to deliver another blow with his whip. Haran clutches his head even tighter, hoping that this time he will be able to pull off the points. But all his attempts fail. Haran realizes and accepts that he will not succeed. Opening his eyes, the young swordsman sees that his opponent's whip is once again flying at him. It strikes the young swordsman right in the face, causing him to feel extreme pain. However, the opponent is not going to stop. He exposes his huge sword. But this time Haran managed to dodge the sword. Otherwise, the blow would have been fatal. The young swordsman's mind is a mess. He tries to put the puzzle together, but he fails. Haran rises from his knees and looks suspiciously at his opponent. Haran realizes that while the stranger is idle, he must run to save himself. But no sooner does he take a few steps than his opponent strikes him again with his whip. Haran is in terrible pain, and scarlet blood flows from the hand where the whip struck him. Finally, Haran realizes that before he was in this location, there was another monster in front of him. Other thoughts begin to pop into his head, and then something seems to manifest in his mind. Haran realizes that he is now in a virtual reality in which he cannot experience physical pain. It's just a game, nothing more. He has never experienced pain in it. It's just not possible. Haran continues to stand with his back to his opponent, completely oblivious to him. More thoughts begin to appear in the young swordsman's mind, which throw him into shock. He stares at the statue of the Asian god as if searching for answers in his eyes. Meanwhile, behind the young swordsman's back, he hears the sound of footsteps of not one person but several at once. Haran pays no attention to them and continues to stand back, trying to build a logical chain in his head. Finally, the puzzle in Haran's head comes together and he realizes that what is happening is real. However, Haran cannot believe it because he is absolutely sure that he was playing a game. Haran is in despair. His arm hurts treacherously. He does not notice how the opponent behind him swung his sword at him. Suddenly, the young swordsman comes to his senses and turns back sharply, sensing something wrong. Immediately, the masked opponent strikes him with a crushing blow, which Haran flies away from. Haran remains on his feet, but the stranger swings his sword at him again. The other stranger is watching everything that is happening. Suddenly, Haran hears the one telling his opponent not to let him escape. The young swordsman is very surprised that his opponents are talking to each other. Then one of the strangers starts uttering various insults at Haran. Hearing this, the young swordsman realizes that the monsters in front of him are not monsters at all, as he had originally assumed. Haran starts screaming, trying to stop his opponents. He realizes that the people in front of him are humans. Suddenly, the boy stumbles over a small rock under his feet. The young swordsman cries out sharply as he realizes he is losing his balance and begins to fall. As he falls, Haran lands on his back, hitting the ground hard with a loud thud. Haran lies on the ground completely defenseless, while his opponents lean over him, wanting to kill him. Two well-sharpened swords crossed on the neck of Haran lying on the ground. But suddenly another masked man and his companion, a girl with turquoise hair, appeared. The man stopped Haran's opponents. The young swordsman is surprised that there is a girl in the company of strangers. Besides, she is the only one besides himself who didn't hide her face behind a mask. The stranger who appeared at the most opportune moment was the leader of this gang. He stopped the rest of the men and ordered Haran to be lifted up. The entire gang of strangers immediately obeyed him and ordered Haran to stand up, which he hurriedly did. The stranger with turquoise hair turned to Haran, asking him who he was. Seeing the stranger's face closer, Haran was surprised. She reminded him a lot of someone. Here, Haran's musings were interrupted by one of the gang members ordering him to answer. Haran is visibly nervous. He doesn't know how to explain to these people what happened to him. Haran doesn't have time to begin his story because unidentifiable bodies of either birds or some imaginary creatures start falling from the sky. One of them falls right at the feet of the young swordsman. The spray from it flies in different directions. Taking a closer look at what is falling from the sky, Haran realizes that it is not birds but some incomprehensible creatures. Haran stares in horror at what is happening, not realizing what is going on around him. Suddenly, loud, heavy footsteps are heard from behind. Someone is approaching the company. From behind Haran and his erstwhile adversaries appears a huge ambo with burning demonic eyes. A stranger with turquoise eyes stares at him point blank, clearly knowing who it is. One of the gang members, trying to get everyone else's attention, yells that they are being ambushed. Ambal pulls out his axe and stands up to face the masked men. He is noticeably larger than them, so numerical superiority may not help. The masked men begin to attack their huge opponent, striking with their swords one by one. However, the enemy clearly has no intention of retreating. He brings a huge axe over their heads. The savage, that's what the masked men call their opponent, delivers a decisive blow to one of them. Haran is watching. He is not used to seeing such a thing. A few drops of blood even lands on the face of Haran's young swordsman. Haran's heart is racing. From what he sees, he is in a state of shock. The guy realizes that a man has just died in front of him, and this is not a game. Meanwhile, the fight continues. The savage has slew almost all his opponents, and their breathless bodies now lie on the ground. The thought flashes through Haran's mind again that everything that is happening is not a game, but reality. The last masked member of the gang appeared before the savage, about to strike. The masked man is furious, for just now the savage has killed his comrades before his eyes. He runs at the ambo, about to deliver a crushing blow with his sharp sword. But his blow is repulsed, and the body of the masked man falls at Haran's feet. The masked man does not breathe. He suffers the same fate as the rest of his comrades. Haran's eyes are filled with horror. The young swordsman realizes that he could be next. Only he and the turquoise-haired stranger are left in the savage's path, and she has no intention of backing down. The savage brings his axe over the girl's head, but she does not run but looks directly at her opponent, who is several times larger than her. Haran's eyes, on the other hand, are full of terror. So many people have already been killed in front of him, albeit ones who recently attacked the young swordsman himself. Meanwhile, the savage lands several blows on the turquoise-haired stranger. From such powerful blows, the girl flies back and falls to the ground, but she is still alive. With her last strength, the stranger tries to get up, but she is not very good at it. She is badly wounded. Nevertheless, she sticks her sword into the ground, leaning on it, continues to try to get up. Haran comes to his senses. He realizes that the stranger with turquoise hair is a real person. If she is not helped, she will die for real. The savage keeps stepping on the girl and so can't get up off the ground. Haran realizes that something must be done, but he doesn't even have a weapon. Haran realizes that if he gets into a fight, he will die, and he doesn't want that. Suddenly, someone grabs Haran, who already wanted to run away, by the arm. It is one of Princess Utah's masked men, badly wounded but still alive. He asks that Haran save the turquoise-haired girl from being killed. He says that the young swordsman just has to do it. After uttering the phrase, the masked man's head falls to the ground and passes away. Haran is breathing heavily. He is scared because the guy realizes that here he is a real person, not a character in the game. Meanwhile, the girl with turquoise hair still managed to get up and continued the fight from the last strength. Haran tries to overcome his fear. In his heart, he realizes that he should help. Haran closes his eyes, fighting the doubts swirling around in his head. Suddenly, a task window appears in front of Haran, like a computer game he played a while back. The mission appears in the window stating that he must protect Princess Yuta, and then Haran realizes who the stranger with turquoise hair reminds him of. It's Yuta, the same elf who gave him the mission at the beginning of the game. Haran is surprised as he was sure he was in reality now. So why is a virtual character here? Haran hears a new audio notification. New information appears in the mission window. It states that failure of the mission will result in death, which scares Haran. Haran drops to his knees on the ground, dumbfounded by such news. He was not prepared for such a thing. The boy wonders what he should do after all. Meanwhile, the fight continues. And it's not Princess Yuta who wins the fight. The savage strikes her with powerful blows one after another. After another blow, Princess Yuta falls to the ground again. She has almost no strength left. But her eyes are full of rage. She doesn't want to end up like this, not at the hands of the savage. The savage approaches Princess Yuta lying on the ground. The girl is unable to get up. The savage looms over her. His eyes burn with red flames. His plan is to take the princess's life. Yuta realizes she can't resist him. Just a little more and her end will come. The savage brings his sword over Yuta's head, but Haran appears and deflects the blow with his sword, which he took from one of the dead. Princess Yuta is surprised. She didn't expect anyone to help her, especially a stranger. Meanwhile, Haran tries his best to confront the savage. He says he will detain him and orders Yuta to flee. The savage's angry eyes burn. He smirks as he is pleased with his new victim. The young swordsman can no longer hold back the savage's onslaught. He tries his best, but Haran's strength is running out. The savage reflects the sword of the hero, after which he flies back a few meters. Meanwhile, the savage is not going to retreat. He is ready to deliver a decisive blow. However, the young swordsman still stands on his feet and holds his sword firmly in his hands. After another strong blow from the savage, Haran flies back again. This time he fails to stay on his feet and falls to the ground with his back to the ground, still holding his sword. The young swordsman realizes that he must get up as quickly as possible as the enemy is closing in. The savage raises his heavy axe and strikes the young swordsman with it. Haran flies back a few meters again. The blows follow one after another. The young swordsman sits on all fours on the ground and tries to catch his breath, unable to get up. Haran watches his opponent carefully, sitting on the ground. He ponders what he should do next. Meanwhile, his formidable opponent approaches again, swinging at him with his powerful arm, more like a sledgehammer. The young swordsman looks straight into his opponent's eyes. He is not going to die today. It's as if Haran has gotten a second wind. He deftly bounces back to avoid the savage's blow. Suddenly, the young swordsman has a vague memory in his mind. Haran recalls what the savage's tactics were. First, he managed to repel a powerful attack. Then the enemy used a horizontal long-range attack. Then the enemy took a short break to catch his breath and recover. After a short break, having regained his strength, the savage struck hard again. In the young swordsman's mind, a logical chain is forming. He realizes what is happening. He compares the facts and realizes that this attack tactic is identical to what the demon Trigon had in the game. Haran remembers how cleverly he was able to score victories when he was a swordsman in virtual reality. Haran realizes that he has a good chance of winning. He can see through his opponent's attacks. The young swordsman raises his sword and delivers a powerful blow to his opponent. In doing so, the young swordsman realizes that he can block all of the savage's blows. The opponent advances, Haran blocks all his blows and thinks of ways to take him away. Haran remembers that he completely forgot about Princess Yuta during the fight. He averts his gaze in her direction. Looking in the direction where Princess Yuta last lay, Haran sees that she continues to be in the same spot. The girl did not run away. Taking advantage of Haran's distraction, the enemy brings his axe above him. The young swordsman is immediately distracted from his thoughts as he sees the enemy attacking him. At the last moment, Haran manages to deflect his opponent's blow by raising his sword above his head. The young swordsman tries to throw back the opponent's axe with his sword, but he lacks strength. The opponent is several times Haran's size and stronger. The young swordsman holds on with all his might. The savage's eyes burn with a fierce red light. He is sure that he will definitely win now. The enemy's pressure is so strong that Haran can't resist. His feet literally drive off the ground. The young swordsman is filled with rage, but he realizes he can't hold out much longer. The enemy smirks, realizing that the young swordsman doesn't stand a chance against him. Suddenly, the savage's face changes dramatically. Blood begins to flow from his mouth. The savage abruptly lowers his head and looks at his body. A sharp blade has pierced through him from the back. The young swordsman's opponent starts coughing up blood. He is short of breath. It turned out that Princess Yuta crept up to the savage from behind and pierced him with her sharp sword. Meanwhile, a tall warrior with a good physique is watching from the side. Princess Yuta is wounded, but the rage of losing her comrade has given her strength. The young swordsman looks at his savior. If it wasn't for her, he would be dead like all the masked men. The young swordsman exhales in relief, realizing that it is finally over. Haran releases his sword from his hands, unable to hold it any longer. He has spent the last of his strength on this fight. The young swordsman's sword falls with a loud clang to the ground next to the savage's body. The defeated opponent does not give any signs of life. He does not seem to be breathing. Suddenly, after a few seconds, his huge sledgehammer-like fist strikes the ground with all its force. The savage opens his eyes abruptly. They burn with a fierce red light. It appears that he is not dead at all. Haran notices that his opponent has regained consciousness. He is stunned, as he was certain of his defeat. Before the young swordsman realizes it, the savage rises sharply to his feet and strikes at Haran. From a blow of such force, the young swordsman flies back several meters and falls to the ground. Although the savage continues to bleed from his mouth, he seems to be full of strength again. The savage swings his huge fist at Princess Yuta. The girl didn't expect this turn of events either. In another second, the savage strikes her. She flies away and finds herself lying on the ground like Haran and her dead men. From a blow of such force, Princess Yuta loses consciousness and remains lying on the ground. Haran is also wounded. He is half lying on the ground, his hand holding his head as it splits terribly. The savage approaches the young swordsman's sword to pick up the weapon from the ground. Haran is furious, but to get up from the ground to prevent his opponent from arming himself, he has no strength. And so the huge savage, wounded and angry, looms over Princess Yuta, who continues to be unconscious. The young swordsman realizes that he must, by all means, rise to his feet to protect the princess. Haran fails to get up off the ground. Suddenly, he notices someone rushing past him at a rapid speed. The young swordsman sees someone's feet in front of him. He realizes that whoever is rushing past him is armed. In another second, the stranger is behind the savage's back and draws his sword over his head. The savage realizes too late that someone is attacking him from behind. He has no time to do anything about it. The stranger actively attacks the savage, striking him with his sword one after another. After this attack, the savage has no more chances. He finds himself lying on the ground next to Yuta. The young swordsman is surprised by such an unexpected appearance of the stranger who saved the princess literally at the last moment. On the battlefield, the stranger slides his sword into its scabbard and takes a few seconds to catch his breath. The stranger turns out to be a young boy. He looks fearfully at Princess Yuta. After a few seconds, he finds himself next to the girl and carefully tries to lift her head. The stranger lifts the princess up. Haran hears the stranger asking Yuta to wake up, saying that she cannot die. Much to the relief of both the stranger and Haran, the princess regains consciousness and opens her eyes. Haran hears the stranger ask Princess Yuta if she is okay. Suddenly, Haran hears a sound he knows well. It's a notification coming in, just like in the game. Haran sees a message saying that he has completed the quest, but he has a new quest ahead of him. He must continue to protect the princess. Haran looks at his hands, trying to figure out if he is a real person or a character. He's sure this fight wasn't a game, but then where did the notice come from? Haran is distracted from his musings because someone calls out to him from behind. It's Princess Yuta. She asks him the same question she asked when they met. Who is he, and what is his name? Princess Haran's piercing gaze makes him uncomfortable. Stammering, he says his name. Yuta tells Haran that she owes him a debt, and she's the one who always pays her debts. The girl urges him to follow her for the reward. Haran goes over the princess's words in his head and remembers that the assignment said to follow the princess. It seems that the stranger who just saved them is not happy with this suggestion from Yuta. He tells her that they don't know Haran at all. However, the princess orders that Haran be let closer, citing that if he wanted to do harm, he would have done so already. The stranger adopted a disgruntled pose, making the young swordsman feel uncomfortable. Princess Yuta headed towards her fallen men. She wants to see them off on their final journey properly. The young man who saved Yuta and Haran from death supports the princess's decision with a sad face, and says that he will find a suitable place. A quiet place under a tree that had been damaged by a lightning strike was chosen. Haran, Yuta, and her man salute the fallen warriors. Princess Yuta begins tapping the tip of her sword on the ground. Haran realizes that this is a ritual of her people. The princess then stabs her sword into the ground and lowers her head. Her eyes are full of pain. Princess Yuta begins her speech to honor the warriors. She thanks the warriors for when her father was killed, they defended her to the end. Next, a stranger begins his speech to honor the dead. He says that the warriors were the royal guard and deserved their honor. Princess Yuta is very hurt by his words. She repeats the word honor and goes on to say that it is cruel. Yuta doesn't understand why the world is so unfair. Those who betrayed her live in luxury, and those who kept their honor to the end now lie in the ground. The princess's loyal ally who saved her does not know what to add, so he decides to honor the warriors with silence. Haran also wants to say a few words in memory of the warriors, but he doesn't know what to say. The young swordsman didn't know them. Therefore, he too remains silent. After a moment of silence, the princess hurries away and calls her travelers to follow her. Her man follows her, and Haran stands still for a few more seconds. He listens to the sounds around him. Night has fallen. There is silence all around. Only the rustling of leaves and the chirping of crickets can be heard. A wave of sadness comes over Haran, for he has just seen several people die. Somewhere in the night sky, there is the sound of an eagle searching the ground for its prey. Haran and his companions do not suspect that they are not alone in the forest. A few kilometers away, two men are hiding under the trees. One of them is wearing a kasa, the Japanese national headdress. The man is dozing. A third man appears. He's hanging head down on a branch. Calling the Japanese Goryun, he reports that he sees neither the princess nor the savage. A big man enters the conversation, nibbling on the ribs of a spit-roasted game. He growls that the savage has betrayed them. The Goryun wakes up. He says the savage didn't betray them. He realizes something is amiss. The man hanging on the branch looks at Goryun in surprise. He doesn't understand how he can trust the savages. Goryun raises his head so that his eyes become visible from under his hat. He says that the princess probably escaped all the traps. The big man growls again. He says he will catch the princess. His drool is flowing with rage. The man on the branch, turning to the big man, suggests that he go after the princess right now. However, the Goryun interrupts him. Smiling wryly, he says that there is no need for that. Morning has come. Haran and his companions are still walking to their terminus. And then Princess Yuta's man takes the last step and stops as they have arrived. Princess Yuta and her companions are standing on a hill overlooking the city. Haran stares intently at the scene stretching out before him. His hair flutters in the wind. Meanwhile, the city is bustling with life. Its elderly governor, Mawan, stands in the middle of the room with a paintbrush in his hands, thinking about something. The governor does not yet know that a servant is hurrying up the stairs to report urgent news to him. Mawan sits down at his desk and begins to write something with a brush on a blank sheet of paper. There is a loud knock on his room. The governor took his eyes off the letter and ordered him to enter. The servant literally flew into the room, surprising Governor Manhwa with this behavior. The servant hurriedly tells him, literally shouting that Princess Utah has returned. On the face of Manhwa and his second servant, who had been in the room all this time, one can read great surprise. The governor and servants rush to the main gate to meet Princess Yuta. Meanwhile, Princess Yuta and her companions are waiting at the main gate. Strata does not let them in as he does not know who they are. The governor approaches the main gate. He has approached Yuta. Manhwa is a stout and tall old man. Against his background, the princess looks miniature. Princess Yuta threw the hood of her cloak over her head so as not to attract attention. She looks at the elder carefully. Governor Manhwa too scrutinizes the girl's face, not believing that it is really Yuta in front of him. But then he finds familiar features in her face and his eyes fill with tears. He hugs the princess tightly. Manhwa is glad that she is alive and okay. Tears of joy flow from Governor Manhwa's eyes. He can no longer contain his emotions. He hugs Yuta even tighter, calling her mistress, and tells her that it has been a long time since they last met. The princess is happy to see him too. The elder is completely emotional. Still hugging Yuta, he falls to his knees. The people of the town crowded around him. After a while, Yuta and her companions find themselves in the governor's house. He treats them to hot soup. Yuta, her man, Haran, and Manhwa sit at a large table. The governor apologizes for the modest table. But Yuta is not bothered by this. She eats the soup happily and says she hasn't seen a proper meal in a long time. Governor Manhwa is pleased that he was able to please her. He says it's been 10 years since they last met, and admits that he recognizes Yuta. The princess looks at Governor Manhwa with a gentle smile and jokes that he has gone bald since they last met. Governor Manhwa scratches the back of his head and laughs at the top of his voice, saying he can't help it as he ages. Still smiling the same way, Princess Yuta asks the elder if she is overreacting. Governor Manhwa continues to laugh. The elder is in great spirits. He replies that everything is fine. The governor stops laughing and turns to Haran and his companion with a serious look. Manhwa realizes that they were the ones who protected Yuta on the journey. Haran's companion introduces himself to the elder. It turns out he is a general of the royal guard. Governor Maven then turns to Haven. He asks him who he is. Haran begins to stammer in the conversation. Princess Yuta comes to the rescue, saying that Haran saved her on her journey and asks the old man to reward him. The governor's eyes become round. He thinks about how he would reward the guy. The governor gets up from his chair and rests his palm on the young swordsman's chair. Old man Manhwa then brings his face close to Haran's and looks into his eyes with gratitude. However, Haran becomes uncomfortable with this closeness. He becomes visibly nervous. The old man Manhwa, however, is good-natured towards him. He smiles kindly, believing him to be a simple young man. Haran realizes that in this reality, no one knows who he is. Here he is really a simple young man, not a brave swordsman. Governor Manhwa continues to smile and Haran calms down a bit. Finally, the old man moves away from Haran and says that he must be tired after the hard journey. The old man sits down in his seat. One can see that he too is tired. Turning to Haran, he asks him to get a good rest. Princess Yuta smilingly looks at Haran and Manhwa. She is grateful to the elder. The governor instructs his servant to escort the princess and her companions to their rooms. Night has fallen. Silence reigns in the city. All its inhabitants are sound asleep. Meanwhile, the young swordsman is in his room lying on his bed in the clothes he came in. He didn't have the strength to undress. Haran's eyes are open and he stares at the ceiling, a flood of thoughts keeping him awake. He remembers Trigon and the savage and Yuta and the masked man who asked him to save her. Suddenly, a window pops up with a new mission to rescue the princess. Haran is surprised. He still doesn't understand what's going on. He seems to be in reality, but the task comes as in a game. He desperately tries to get out of the quest, but windows appear in front of him that the quest is in progress. Haran realizes, in order for him to return home, he must complete all the quests, and to do so, he must follow the princess. The young swordsman sighs sadly and closes his eyes in an attempt to sleep. However, He does not succeed. He abruptly opens his eyes upon hearing another sound notification. Opening his eyes, he sees a new window with a task. It says that he must save Yuta from a surprise attack by assassins. The young swordsman sits up abruptly on his bed. In such an agitated state, he will definitely not be able to sleep. In his head, he scrolls through the information about the new assignment. It says that the assassin's attack will be unexpected. Haran realizes that it could happen at any moment. The hero leaves his room looking around carefully. Haran looks around the corridor carefully, trying to find something to help him in his attack. In the corner, he sees a sharpened axe and dagger. This is just what the young swordsman needs. Haran picks up the weapons and looks them over carefully, trying to figure out how to use them. After all, he had only held a sword in his hands before. Sleep has completely receded from the young swordsman. He is focused and thinking about the upcoming attack. In the hallway near the door to Governor Mawan's room, a guard consisting of 2 armed men stands guard. Governor Mawan is awake as well. He sits at his desk with candles lit. The elder Mawan has a tired and saddened look, which is strange. After all, he had recently been so happy about Yuta's return. The room is completely silent. You can even hear the candle melting under the influence of the flame. Suddenly, the burning candle is extinguished as a draft appears in Governor Mawan's room. It has appeared because the window to the room has opened and a silhouette of Goryun has emerged. Turning to Mawan, he says that it was his house that Yuta came to, which means she trusts him. Goryun is glad as it makes his task easier. Governor Mawan is not surprised by his behavior. The elder raises his eyes to Goryun and tells him that he only cooperates with a certain Zod. Goryun puts his head down and agrees with Mawan, but lastly he has something he wants to tell the governor. He tells him that he saw a fallen savage, one of his men, adds that he wasn't bad and he heaps threats on his killer. Old man Mawan tells Goryun that he need not worry about the commander of the royal army, as he has alienated him from the princess. Goryun, moving from one corner of the room to the other, replies with feigned courtesy that the governor shouldn't have bothered so much. Goryun is about to leave when suddenly he hears old Mawan calling him. The governor literally shouts that he has captured the princess as promised. Now Goryun is obliged to free his grandson. The old man's eyes round when he hears not at all what he was hoping for. Goryun replies that he has no intention of freeing his grandson. That's what the master asked him to tell the old man. Humming a cheerful song to himself, Goryun leaves the governor's room. At last the villain chuckles at the top of his voice. He takes pleasure in making Mawan suffer. Old Mawan is left alone in his room. He is consumed by guilt and despair. In her room, Yuta wakes up to someone calling her and trying to wake her up. When she opens her eyes, she sees her father in front of her, who is literally glowing. Yuta doesn't notice that he has no eyes on his face. The surprised princess immediately wakes up and sits up on her bed. After a few seconds, she throws herself into his arms, unable to contain her genuine joy. The princess hugs her father, a tall, gray-haired man in light-colored robes, tightly. She tells him that she knew he was alive. Her father strokes Yuta's head as if he doesn't know what she's talking about. He thinks she's having a nightmare. Yuta sobs, hugging him even tighter, unable to believe what is happening. The man remains silent. In an instant, it's as if he's petrified, but Yuta can feel his breath on the top of her head. When Yuta begins to find his silence suspicious, he pats her lightly on the back. But suddenly, Yuta's father takes on the appearance of a dead man. She opens her eyes abruptly, startled. She doesn't realize what's happening. After a few seconds, she realizes that she is lying in her bed with a figure looming over her, swinging a dagger at her. The assassin doesn't have time to finish what he started, however, because Haran appears and strikes at him. And now the assassin is already lying a few meters away from Princess Yuta's bed. Haran's eyes are full of rage. It seems that he is waiting for a new battle in which he is ready to defend Yuta to the end. Princess Yuta sits on her bed and looks at what is happening with both a surprised and frightened look. However, Princess Yuta's failed assassin is not dead. He's back on his feet. It turns out to be one of Goryun's associates, the same one who was hanging on a branch in the forest and spying. The young swordsman is completely focused on his opponent. He holds his dagger at the ready. The failed assassin snickers. He calls Haran a servant, says he has courage but no intelligence. Suddenly the enemy's gaze changes. He becomes more serious and asks Haran if he can do anything in the dark. Haran is angry. He doesn't understand what his opponent means, so he keeps his ear to the ground. The young swordsman tries to keep his guard up for good reason. A few more seconds and his opponent attacks him. Haran manages to dodge, his opponent noting that he is not as slow as he thought, but then adds that fools can't be slow. But while his opponent is chattering and throwing insults around, Haran delivers a fist strike that hits the assassin on the bridge of his nose. From such a blow, Haran's opponent is unable to stand on his feet. He falls down and loses consciousness. Only when he sees that his opponent is already unconscious does he lower his weapon and catch his breath. Princess Yuta looks at Haran with a serious look. She asks him what is going on. The young swordsman does not answer. Instead, he asks the princess if she is all right. The princess doesn't have time to answer him because the room is illuminated by a flash of bright light. Haran realizes that this is not the end of the story. He will continue to have to protect the girl. Princess Yuta still doesn't understand anything. She just stares at that flash of light. From the flash of light, a dark figure wearing a Japanese national headdress appears. Standing in front of the princess and Haran is Goryun. He has a snide smile on his face. Goryun's weapon is slung on his shoulder. He doesn't seem like he's going to attack at all. The princess sitting on the bed is furious. In a commanding tone, she asks the stranger who he is. Goryun replies that they have finally met after all. Remarks that the princess is strong and escapes. A bestial grin appears on Goryun's lips. Yuta realizes that he is about to attack. Another second and Goryun attacks the unarmed princess, but his punch is blocked by Haran. Goryun doesn't seem to have expected this. He sighs in annoyance, but you can tell by the look on his face that he doesn't see Haran as a worthy opponent. However, the young swordsman has no intention of giving up. He will defend Yuta to the last. Suddenly, Goryun intercepts his weapon with his other hand, making a deft move. The young swordsman did not expect this, and therefore did not prepare for such an action of the opponent. This played a cruel trick on him. Goryun abruptly retracts his weapon and strikes with his foot. The young swordsman flies back a few meters and falls with his back on the floor. Haran is angry with himself for not understanding his opponent's fighting tactics. He first distracted him with his arm and then attacked him with a kick. From behind, Princess Yuta flies at Goryun with a naked sword, but Goryun is amused. Goryun turns around lightning fast and blocks her blow. The girl ends up lying on the floor. Goryun looks at the princess with a gloating smile, believing that she is completely powerless against him. Goryun is right. The princess is on the floor and near her face is a sword blade, which at any moment can deliver a fatal blow. The young swordsman is quite a distance away from them. The thought flashes through his mind that things could end sadly. The young swordsman cannot let the princess die. He tries to jump to his feet, but Goryun is faster. Suddenly he is next to him and kicks Haran in the face. The young swordsman flies backwards before he can get to his feet. Goryun is still smiling evilly. Haran's back hits the floor with a great thud, but even as he falls, he lets go of his dagger. After the fall and the hard blow, Haran manages to squat up quickly, but he is dizzy. Goryun approaches him. However, his opponent does not attack. Instead, he points to his shaking hands. Haran looks at his opponent with anger, and he explains that his hands are shaking because he is excited about the impending murder of the princess. Goryun looks directly into Haran's eyes and smiles, asking him to stay out of his way. Goryun turns away and heads towards the princess, who is lying nearby on the floor. The young swordsman gathers his strength to strike his opponent. After a few seconds, he manages to jump to his feet and attack his enemy. Goryun begins to hurl insults at the young swordsman, but he smiles as he does so. Goryun wants to strike at him with his weapon, but Haran turns and runs away with lightning speed. The smile disappears from Goryun's face as he realizes what the young swordsman is up to. Haran rushes towards Princess Yuta, who has woken up and was able to sit up but not get to her feet. Princess Yuta looks at Haran in surprise. trying to figure out what he is up to. After a split second, Haran flies over to her and wraps his arms around her. The young swordsman takes a confident step forward, even though he was still on his feet a short while ago. A second later, Haran and Princess Yuta are at the window and jump out of it. Princess Yuta wasn't scared because she didn't even have time to realize anything. The young swordsman flies down. A strong stream of wind hits him in the face so that it becomes difficult to breathe. Goryun flies over to the window as well, leaning against the frame looking down as Haran and Yuta plunge into the water. You can tell by Goryun's look of annoyance. He tries to call out to the couple, but Haran and Yuta are nowhere to be seen. Goryun waits a few more minutes, expecting that the princess and her protector are about to surface. A dark night looms over the city. Goryun realizes that it is pointless to wait and leaves. The action takes place in the governor's room. He is surprised by the news he has just received. The servant repeats the news to Governor Manhwa again. He says that Princess Yuta managed to escape the assassin attack and escaped. Old man Manhwa is annoyed. He clutches his head, lamenting that he gave such a good opportunity and Goryun blew it. Now the princess has escaped and is likely to go to a land with many of her allies, which meant the life of Maven's grandson would be in danger. The governor's forehead is covered with sweat. He is frightened and doesn't know what he should do next. Governor Mavan opens his eyes. His eyes are tired because he has had so many sleepless nights. Governor Manhwa rises abruptly from his chair and calls his servant to him. The old man is angry and annoyed. He has decided that they will track down the princess and says to warn every soldier about it. The pond that Haran and Yuta fell into is connected to a canal at the other end of the city. The water in the canal is standing water, but suddenly, all of a sudden, circles and bubbles appear on the water surface. Haran surfaces, greedily gulping air after being underwater for so long. He puffs, trying to gather his thoughts. His head is not thinking clearly after the oxygen deprivation. Haran finally regains consciousness and starts looking around for the princess. He is startled to see that the princess is nowhere to be found, but then he notices an object a few meters away from him. As he looks closer, he realizes that it is Princess Yuta, who has surfaced on the surface of the water, but she shows no signs of life. The young swordsman immediately rushes to her, fearing that the worst may happen. Swimming up, Haran wraps his arms around Princess Yuta and tries to see if she is alive. Feeling her heartbeat, Haran exhales with relief. The princess is alive, just unconscious. Still holding Yuta above the water to keep her from drowning, he begins to look around for a place to rest. Haran finds a shed whose door is unlocked and takes the princess in there. He gently places Princess Yuta on a haystack. The girl still does not regain consciousness. The young swordsman sits down on the floor nearby and ponders what he should do next. Haran sighs heavily. It was indeed a difficult night that robbed him of his last strength. Suddenly he realizes that he has completed the task of saving the princess from the assassin's attack. He immediately opens the quest card to check. However, the quest is not completed. Haran doesn't realize why. What Haran doesn't realize is that the quest is not yet complete. Mavan's men are looking for the princess everywhere, so she is still in danger. The action shifts back to the governor's houses. Someone's hand is holding onto the door jamb. It is the commander of the royal guard who is badly wounded, but continues to repel blows with his sword. Standing against him are several soldiers sent by Governor Mavan to kill the commander. The commander of the royal guard has already realized what the matter is. He realizes that Mawan has joined the enemies who are led by a certain Zod. One of Mavan's soldiers swings his sword at the commander, but he manages to grab Governor Mavan's soldier by the arm and parry his blow. Next, the commander of the royal guard strikes at him, from which the soldier flies away. A few more seconds and the deed is done. The commander impales his opponent with his sword. Looking at the remaining men with a menacing gaze, he says that he will give them a chance to leave with dignity. However, the soldiers are not ready to retreat either. They have orders, which they follow. As the commander finishes with them, the soldiers lie dead on the floor. He hears a voice from the back. From the second floor of the house, someone jumps down with a deft and graceful movement. Goryun appears before the commander of the royal guard. From the conversation, it becomes clear that they already know each other. The commander is clearly not happy to see Goryun in front of him. He says that he should be in prison. Goryun, smiling evasively as always, says that he was soon promoted. Apparently the other traitors were able to keep him from suffering the fate of a prisoner. Goryun's already narrow eyes narrow even further. He says that once the princess dies, the warlord will be useless. The warlord is not going to wait any longer. He attacks Goryun, but he deftly dodges. Meanwhile, Goryun does not miss the opportunity to hurt the warlord, saying that he is in vain loyal to the already dead king. This infuriates the commander of the royal guard, and he is furious that the enemy dares to even mention the fallen king. The commander is about to attack again, but Goryun is sure that he cannot defeat him. The action takes place in the barn in which Harana and Princess Yuta found shelter. The girl has regained consciousness. She is still very weak, but she has already been able to open her eyes. When Princess Yuta realizes she is in an unfamiliar place, she sits up abruptly, drawing Haran's attention. Haran looks at her carefully and doesn't understand what she was so scared of. The princess begins to question her companion about where she is. Haran doesn't know how to brief her about everything. He begins by saying that they were running from an assassin. At this, Princess Yuta interrupts him as memories come back to her. She recalls that they fell into the river. After that, Princess Yuta falls silent and sighs heavily. She has long had to fight for her life on a daily basis. However, Haran takes his downcast mood personally. He thinks he has let himself go too far. But instead of reproach, Haran hears praise for him. The princess says that what he did was very brave. The young man is surprised. Princess Yuta looks him straight in the eye with a gentle gaze and thanks him for saving her life again. The young swordsman clearly did not expect such words from the crowned lady. Before Haran can say anything to Yuta, she is already standing by the door and pulling it open by the round handle. Princess Yuta tells Haran that someone from the fortress must be looking for them, so they should go back. The young swordsman agrees with the princess. He too feels that this is the most appropriate decision right now. The young men go outside from their temporary shelter. It is still night outside. Princess Yuta goes first and Haran follows her. Finally, he dares to ask her a question. Haran asks the princess why she is being hunted if she is the heir to the throne. Princess Yuta stops abruptly after Haran asks her the question. The question didn't anger the girl. She decided to answer it. Yuta explained that a weak heiress will always be absorbed by someone stronger. In response, the princess asks her own question. She asks Haran if he ever lost something he loved very much, and adds that she herself has lost everything she loved. The young swordsman looks at the girl and doesn't know what to say to that. Meanwhile, Yuta continues. She says that she has realized something. To protect what she holds dear, she needs power. The young swordsman listens intently to his companion. He is ready to help her gain power. The princess finishes her speech and says it is time for them to return to the fortress. Haran agrees with her and looks up, trying to determine if they are under threat. He thinks he can see a figure on the wall, but he can't see anything in the darkness. Haran wants to leave, but his gut tells him to try to get a better look at the wall. Suddenly, the young swordsman sees a man tied to a wooden pole on the wall. Haran cries out sharply, realizing that he is not mistaken. There is indeed a tied man up there. Haran's shout catches Princess Yuta's attention and she turns to look at him. The girl moves closer to her companion and looks up as well to see what's going on. Suddenly, Princess Yuta's face changes. She recognizes the man tied to the pole. It's Sun, the one who is the commander of the royal guard. Apparently, he lost the battle to Goryun. Sun's hands, body, and legs are tied to the pole. He's covered in blood. From afar, you can't tell if he's dead or just unconscious. Yuta doesn't understand what her comrade is doing on the wall of the fortress. In her head, she thinks that Mawan did it, but the girl doesn't believe it. Princess Yuta tries her best to justify Mawan in her head, but deep down she understands everything. While Haran and Yuta are looking at the knotted Suna, someone sneaks up behind them. It is one of Governor Mawan's soldiers. He hurries to call out to the others upon seeing the princess. 3 warriors appear in front of Yuta and Haran. The commander gives the command, Take the princess alive and kill the swordsman. This is when Haran gets suspicious. Why were Mavan's soldiers ordered to capture them? The princess has no more doubts. Governor Mawan has betrayed her as well. Princess Yuta stands literally in a daze at this discovery. Suddenly, someone grabs her wrist. It's her companion, Haven. He says they need to run away immediately and pulls her by the arm towards the open door. Princess Yuta looks at him. Her eyes are filled with anger, resentment, and pain at the betrayal of a loved one she trusted. Meanwhile, Goryun appears on the roof. He stands beside Sun, his cloak fluttering in the wind. Surprisingly, there is no smile on his face this time. He stands with a serious look. Turning to his captive son, suddenly he starts discussing the weather. It turns out that the commander of the royal guard is still alive, but badly wounded. He asks Goryun to just kill him and call it a day. Goryun's eyes narrow and a smile appears on his lips. He takes pleasure in tormenting his captive. Suddenly, someone's hurried footsteps are heard on the stairs that lead to the roof. A few seconds later, Governor Mawan appears before Goryun on the roof. Governor Mawan looks at him without a fraction of sympathy. You can see by him that he is forced to cooperate with Goryun, not of his own free will. Goryun turns to old Mawan and asks him caustically if he is done playing the loyalty game. Goryun's words infuriate Governor Mawan. He shouts at him that he knows nothing about loyalty. However, the conflict is interrupted as the governor's soldiers arrive with a report. One of them reports that they found the princess, but then lost her again. Governor Mawan is angry, for the life of his favorite grandson is at stake. If he doesn't catch Yuta, his grandson will be killed. One of the soldiers continues his report. He says that they have blocked off the entire neighborhood and should find the princess soon. Governor Mawan, with a menacing look, gives orders to mobilize all remaining forces. The governor is angry. First Goryun pissed him off, now the soldiers. He whispers curses at them. Suddenly, the governor hears someone criticizing him for his actions. It is the commander of the royal guard, Sun. He is trying to shame Mawan for betraying the late king. The governor realizes that he has done the unforgivable and will someday be punished for his sins. He urges Suna to worry about his life. The commander of the royal guard smiles. He is amused by the old man's words. Sun replies that his fate is already clear and then starts shouting the princess's name at the top of his voice. Governor Mawan is furious. He is afraid that the warlord will disrupt all his plans. Sun continues to shout. He asks the princess to run away and not to think of him as only she can fulfill the king's dying wish. Governor Mawan orders him to be silent, promising to cut out the warlord's tongue. However, the old man does not have time to carry out his threat because he is stopped by Goryun. Goryun tells the governor to just wait. The bait in the form of Suna himself lures the princess into a trap. Governor Mawan can barely contain himself, but he listens to Goryun because he realizes that this is the only chance to save his grandson. Meanwhile, the commander of the royal guard falls silent, and Goryun begins whistling a cheerful tune to himself. Governor Sun has no more strength to scream. He bleeds to death and passes out. Meanwhile, Governor Mawan's soldiers are making their way around the fortress grounds. Two soldiers enter the temple where a statue of a Chinese deity stands. They scrutinize the dark room, illuminating it with burning torches. The soldiers conclude that there is nothing suspicious in the temple, but it is in fact occupied by Yuta and Haran. The soldiers leave, muttering to themselves that they don't understand where the princess and her companion could have gone. The princess and Haran are sitting on a large beam located under the roof. They could not be seen in the darkness. After the soldiers leave, Haran exhales a sigh of relief, glad that they were not seen. The young swordsman turns his attention to a subdued Yuta who sits in the corner. The princess is saddened. She says that she has no doubt that she heard Suna's voice. Abruptly, Princess Yuta jumps down, realizing that Suna must be rescued immediately. Haran is not pleased at such a rash act by the princess. From above, he shouts to her in a half-whisper that the soldiers are still outside. However, the princess is well aware of their tactics. She explains that they've been through here before, which means they're safe now. Yuta looks out to assess the situation. In parallel, she tells Haran that she doesn't know when she will be able to give him the reward or if she will even be able to do so. Haran looks at her with surprise and resentment because he doesn't want her reward at all. He just wants to get home. However, Princess Yuta thinks he doesn't want to go any further with her. She advises him to wait in hiding for a while and then quietly escape. Princess Yuta then slips out of her hiding place and runs forward along the narrow streets. A notice appears in front of Haran. It says if he fails the mission, he will die. Meanwhile, Mavan's men continue to search everywhere for Princess Yuta. One of the soldiers looks around carefully but doesn't see the girl on the dark rooftop. When the soldier is directly under Yuta, she jumps on top of him and strikes. Princess Yuta takes a hard breath, then walks over to the man lying on the ground. Princess Yuta examines the soldier carefully to find something she can use. The girl fumbles for the soldier's sword and pulls the blade out of its sheath. Princess Yuta picks up the sword and sighs heavily as she has a hard journey ahead of her. The girl looks up at the roof where Sun is being held hostage, tied to a pole. The princess asks to wait for her comrade a little longer. She goes to fetch him. Only the princess is about to set off as a huge dark figure appears behind her back. Despite the fact that the girl is standing with her back, she catches a stranger's movement. Princess Yuta turns around sharply, ready to defend herself with the sword she has obtained. But to her great surprise, the dark figure, who turns out to be a soldier, falls at her feet. Standing behind her is Haran. He is the one who attacked and disarmed the soldier. He scolds Yuta for going after Sun without a plan. Yuta looks at Haran with surprise. She thought he was long gone since what is happening doesn't concern him and she can't reward him. The action moves to a rooftop where a warlord is being held hostage. Soldiers are guarding the warlord. They have no doubt that the princess will soon arrive. From around the corner, a third soldier is watching all this closely. It is Haran, who took the clothes from the guard killed by the stone just before. He watches the two soldiers who are guarding Suna closely and is pleased that they are relaxed enough not to expect an attack. When the guards turn their backs, Haran attacks them from the back. Both soldiers fall to the ground with a clatter at the young swordsman's feet. Haran watches them for a few more seconds to make sure they don't get up. The commander of the royal guard, Sun, who had been unconscious the whole time, comes to his senses. Haran takes a seat next to Sun and asks him why he is here. However, it's as if he doesn't hear the question. He is more concerned about whether Yuta is all right. The young swordsman hurries to reassure the warlord, telling him that Yuta is fine, she is safe. Haran unties Suna and helps him up, putting his shoulder to his side. They slowly head towards the exit. The warlord thanks Haran. No sooner have they left the roof than someone shouts after them, addressing Haran. The figure of Goryun appears on the roof. He says that Haran helped the princess first, and now he is helping the decoy. The young swordsman looks at Goryun with hatred and rage, while holding the eating Suna standing. Goryun, with an animal grin, continues. He doesn't understand why Haran would risk himself for some simple guy. Suddenly, the door leading to the roof swings open. Behind it stands a crowd of Maven's armed men. In a few seconds, they are all on the roof and surround Haran and Suna. Goryun is not left out either. He approaches Haran and Suna with slow steps. Grinning, Goryun warns the young swordsman that he should now prepare for the consequences. The commander of the royal guard, Sun, barely moving his lips, says that this is all because of him. The young swordsman stares absent-mindedly at his opponents. He knew exactly what he was getting into. The action shifts to the governor's house. Mavan sits at his desk, surrounded by servants. With sadness, old Maven remembers his grandson, when he was still a child, how they used to play wonderfully with him. Suddenly someone knocks loudly in Mawan's room. The governor orders them to come in. It is one of his soldiers who reports that they have captured Princess Yuta. Governor Mawan jumps up from his desk at this news. The soldier reports that they caught Princess Yuta in front of the execution site, where Suna was being held. Governor Mawan takes quick steps toward the door to see the captured princess in person. The action moves to the place of execution. On the ground sits a bound Haran. Goryun stands in front of Haran and interrogates him. He asks, "Where is Princess Yuta?" Not far away sits the warlord's son on the ground, who shouts that Haran has nothing to do with what is happening. Goryun bends over to the young swordsman and looks intently into his face. Haran has lowered his eyes to the ground. He remains silent. The guy is not going to set the princess up. Goryun is well aware that Haran is not going to give up and reveal to him where Yuta is. Goryun's face reveals his traditional egregious smirk. He's up to something. Getting close to Haran so that he can feel his breath on him, Goryun growls that he's waiting for the moment when he'll be writhing in pain. Suddenly, Goryun is interrupted by someone. The sound comes from the direction of the stairs. Governor Mavan appears at the execution site. He says that he has received a report of the princess's capture. The Highlanders turn to Maven. He is surprised at this news as no princess is here. Goryun looks at the governor carefully, realizing that something wrong is going on. At the same second, behind Mawan's back, the very soldier who reported that the princess had been caught draws his sword from its sheath. He attacks Governor Mawan, kicking him in the leg so that he falls to the ground. The soldier looks up and everyone sees that it is Princess Yuta. She orders no one to move, putting her sword to Mawan's neck. Governor Mawan's soldiers are stunned. They don't know what to do. Goryun's eyes are burning. He didn't expect this turn of events, but is glad that the princess has finally shown up. Governor Mawan is also surprised to be taken prisoner by Princess Yuta. He didn't recognize her in the soldier. Princess Yuta is determined. She says that if anyone moves, she will cut off Mawan's head. The commander of the royal guard is as surprised by Princess Yuta's visit as anyone else. Only Haran seemed to know that Princess Yuta would appear soon. Princess Yuta to address the governor. With rage in her eyes, she yells that she didn't expect that he could betray her. Governor Mawan starts to want to justify himself somehow, but realizes that he has no excuse. Princess Yuta demands that the soldiers release the warlord and the young swordsman. Goryun smiles evilly at this demand. He likes the princess's move. She took the old man hostage to get out of the trap. However, Goryun is not going to go along with the princess's move. Instead, he says he will kill the hostages. The princess listens as Goryun says that he has nothing left to lose, but Yuta will lose both of her allies. Goryun's angry eyes narrow and he offers to cut his captives down a bit. However, he does not move to action. Instead, he looks at Governor Mawan. Warlord's son immediately realizes that Goryun is up to something. He yells for the princess to look around carefully. Princess Yuta keeps her eyes on her opponent. She is well aware that she can expect a lot from him. The girl continues to hold her blade near Governor Mawan's neck. The old man himself again remembers the happy past when he used to play with his little grandson and Yuta. He orders his soldiers to release the captives. Goryun did not expect this turn of events. He is furious at such an act of the governor. Old man Mavan repeats his order. He feels terrible remorse. The commander of Mawan's men repeats the governor's order louder for all to hear. The soldiers obey and begin to untie the prisoners, freeing them. Haran helps Sunu up, puts his shoulder under hers, and together they head for the exit. The princess continues to hold Mawan hostage. Turning to Haran, the commander of the royal guard asks that this wasn't his plan after all. He is sure that Yuta acted alone. Haran says he doesn't have time to explain everything that happened. They need to leave quickly. Governor Mavan's chief of guards lets the captives leave quietly, freezing them with a hand from Goryun. However, Goryun is not at all okay with this. He is not about to lose at a time when victory was so close. He angrily growls at the soldiers, calling them stupid idiots who listen to the old man's orders. Suddenly, the young swordsman senses something amiss. He realizes that Goryun won't just let them leave. And Haran is right. Goryun sharply attacks the commander of the governor's troops. He doesn't even have time to realize it. Goryun says there are no victories without sacrifices and draws his sword to deliver the killing blow. Goryun is too far away from his opponents. He can't reach any of them, so he throws his sword point forward. The young swordsman notices this but has no time to do anything. Princess Yuta sees Goryun's sword flying in her direction. She didn't expect it, so she froze like a stumbling block before she could do anything about it. Suddenly, a hand grabs her and throws her backwards. It was just in time for Haran to arrive. Instead of Yuta, the sword pierces Governor Mavan. Haran lies next to Yuta, hugging her tightly with the governor nearby. None of the three move. After a few seconds, Haran sits up. He is alive. The young swordsman checks on the princess's condition. The girl sits up as well. She is unhurt, but Haran still wonders if she is okay. The young swordsman is very worried about the princess. He asks if she can move after such a fall, to which he receives a positive answer. Meanwhile, Goryun appeared before them with his weapon in his hands. He is very angry that again from nowhere this boy Haran has appeared. The commander of the soldiers tries to save Maven. He yells that they must stop the bleeding immediately. He tries to apply proper pressure on the wound to stop the bleeding, but nothing comes out. However, nothing comes out. Governor Mawan has received the punishment he deserved. The gaze of the commander of the dead governor's guard stops on the figure of Goryun. The commander was loyal to the governor, so he's going to avenge his death. However, he blames not only Goryun, but also the recent captives. He orders them all to be killed. All the soldiers rush into battle with naked swords, and there are more than a dozen of them. The commander is ahead of his troops. He shouts for the warriors to leave no one alive. Standing in their way is Goryun. Therefore, he is the first one the soldiers attack. The commander orders them not to surrender. He gives the order to stand until the end. While the battle is going on, Haran, Yuta, and Sunu manage to leave the place of execution. Goryun sees their retreating figures but cannot follow them as he is blocked by another group of soldiers. Goryun growls at the troop commander. He is furious that he has prevented him from finishing what he started. Goryun is attacked again, but it seems he can't be bothered. He deflects all blows. Suddenly, one of the walls of the fortress is pierced by someone's huge fist. Stones fall on the soldiers, and Goryun calmly steps aside. This is the big guy who was with Goryun and the spy in the forest. With just one blow with his huge fist, he scatters over a dozen soldiers. The soldiers of the dead governor look at the big man with horror. He is very huge indeed. Next to the big guy, the same spy who recently made an attempt on Utah in her room will also appear. However, the soldiers, even though they see that the Goryun has arrived, are not going to retreat. They will defend their territory to the last. The spy assesses the situation and tells Goryun that even he can't cope with so many men. Goryun orders the spy to buy him some time so that he can catch up with Yuta and her allies and then return. Goryun rushes off to catch up. The spy is not happy to be assigned such a troublesome task, but draws his weapon. Meanwhile, Yuta, Sun, and Haran have run far enough away. They stop at the stairs to rest and catch their breath. The commander of the royal guard says that there is a small wharf at the north end of the village. This is their opportunity to hide. Haran agrees that it's a good idea, and Yuta sends Sun there first, saying they'll keep watch over him. Sun's face changes. The princess seems offended by her idea. However, the reason for this change is not offense at all. Sun sees the figure of Goryun appear from behind the princess and is about to attack. However, the warlord manages to react and repel the blow. Holding Goryun back, he yells for Yuta to run. Goryun smiles evilly. He is glad that he can get revenge on the warlord for both killing his man, the savage in the forest, and his other antics. Sun is wounded and cannot stand up to Goryun. It all happens in front of Yuta, who realizes that Sun could not have survived after being wounded like that. Haran watches all of this with horror. He has never had to face the death of someone close enough to him before. Realizing that her friend's son is dead, Princess Yuta lashes out with rage at his killer. However, Goryun calmly deflects her blow. What's some girl to him if he could even defeat a great warlord? Princess Yuta falls loudly to the ground after flying a few meters. However, the girl does not intend to give up. Fury gives her strength. She pushes off the ground with her fist and rushes into battle again. Princess Yuta roars with rage. Her anger is so strong that it clouds her mind. She attacks her enemy again, as if she doesn't realize she can't handle him. Yuta is half lying on the ground and Goryun is standing over her with his weapon drawn. Goryun is surprised at how reckless the princess, who has been on the run for over 10 years, is. Maul, Sun was too expensive a tool for Yuta. After that, the princess slams her fist on the ground, unable to contain her rage. Haran is watching everything that is happening from the side. He is thinking of a plan of action. Haran realizes that if he doesn't intervene now, it will be the end for Yuta. But the young swordsman's hands are treacherously trembling. He is not even able to draw his weapon. Meanwhile, Yuta and Harun's dialogue continues. She screams that Sung was not a tool for her. She can't find the right words to say what Sun was to her, but finally utters that he was someone she trusted completely. Haran is reached by Princess Yuta's words that the warlord was a friend to her. She growls at Goryun, calling him a servant working under someone else who doesn't understand the word friend. In response, Goryun only sneers. The princess's rage makes him very happy and amused. Unexpectedly, Goryun is attacked by Haran. After the princess's words, he realizes that he considers her and Suna his friends, and he will avenge his friend's murder. Goryun grabs the young swordsman. He waited for him to not stand aside and intervene. With one swipe of his hand, Goryun throws Haran off and prepares to attack him.